Hello everybody and welcome to this solution video. In this video we'll look at a very basic Hello World application, namely an application where we have three buttons, one to increase a count, one to decrease a count, and one to reset the count back to 0. Now the first thing we have to do is create a new project. In this case we'll create a new project with an empty activity and we'll call it my counter application. You can change the package name if you want. In our case I'm just gonna call it com.example, my counter application, and we're gonna choose it to run on 33 and up, and the Kotlin DSL, that's good, and we're gonna finish, and then we'll get an application like this. So first things first, I usually like to start by making a new package. Just calling it UI something. So we'll call it UI.counter, which will hold both the view and the potential view model for what we'll be creating. So let's make a file, a Kotlin class file, and we'll call it the counter view. Now the only thing my main activity will have to do is call that counter view. So we can take these greetings away, and instead of greeting we can just put here counter view. Right now that is still unknown, but that's fine. So here we'll define a composable function. We'll call it counter view. It doesn't have parameters yet, but we'll have to say that it's a composable. So now we'll have a composable function. I also want to see what I'm doing, so I'm gonna program a preview, and I'm call it preview counter view. Now all that preview has to do is take the counter view into it. So now if I look on the right, we need a build. So we'll quickly build it. Then we'll see some issues. These issues we can easily solve, because it just means that the 1.8.0 is too high for what I have on my computer. So I'll just change that to 1.7.2 instead. And then if we sync it, we should see that it's starting to build. So let's rebuild the project. This takes a while, so I'll cut to the point where it's rebuilded and hopefully works. Yes, we're back. So now if we build and refresh, we should see that we actually get a preview here. And of course it's nothing yet. Now in this counter view, I want to create a column because I want all of my stuff to be from the bottom to the top. And with this column, as I told you, we can have it with modifiers. So I'll define the modifier as a modifier.fillMaxWidth. And that will make the column actually use the complete size that it has, which means that if this one refreshes, we should be able to see it. Let's start putting some stuff in this column. So first things first, I want to have a small spacer at the top, and I'll give it a modifier of height, and then we'll give it 16 dps. Now I have to import some stuff before it starts working. Now we have a spacer. We see that spacer with the background. Then beneath that spacer, I want to be able to show my text. So here I'll have a text composable. We import it from compose. We'll say text is, for now we'll just have it hard coded to a 0. We can say a font size. Let's make it 64.sp. We can have a text align, call it text align center. That just makes it in the center. And then if we hover over this, we see that it doesn't actually fill the max width. So we'll give it a modifier.fillMaxWidth, and then we'll see that it should move to the middle. Now I want this to be actually the main size of the screen. So apart from max width, I'm also gonna tell it that it can take all the size that's left over in my column, and I do that by assigning a weight to it. All the other composables that don't have a weight just take the size that they need, and this one fills the size that it can have. So beneath my text, I want another spacer. Modifier dot height, and we'll call it 16 dp. And then I want to have a row with 2 buttons. And now with a row, we can also say a few things. So we'll do horizontal arrangement, and we can do a vertical alignment, center vertically. We can do that with a column as well, but we probably don't really need it. So now let's put 2 buttons in this row. So first button, we have an on-click with something to do, and then we can define a text for in this button. I'll just call it +1. Let's make it, instead of space between, we'll make it center. Now these buttons, I want it to actually take the width that it can take. So let's give it some modifier. We'll have to add a comma there. Modifier.fill max width. Actually no, because that's gonna be the full screen size, which is not what we want. So let's have it on a weight again. So we'll give it weight 1f. And now you see that the +1 takes all the space it can get. But then if we give the second button the same weight, so we say modifier is modifier.weight 1f, we'll see that they'll get the same size. Now I don't really like this shape either, so we can decide a shape as well, rounded corner shape, and then I'll make it 4 dp instead. And I actually want to change the color as well. So let's say colors is button defaults dot button colors, and then we can change them. Then we'll say container color is material theme dot color scheme dot, let's make it primary color. On the -1 we'll do secondary actually. Now one thing we notice is that it goes all the way to the screen sides, which I don't want. So the easiest way to do this is actually create a padding in the column already. So what we can say here is padding, and then we can do a horizontal padding, and we can just make that 16.dp. And then we do vertical as well. Okay, so one thing we see now is that the 0 is at the top, and we want it actually to be in the middle. So the way we can do this is to put this one inside of a box instead. So with Command Option T or Alt, Control Alt T, you can surround it, and you can say surround it with a widget. And then for this box that we surround it with, we can say modifier is modifier.weight 1f. So it takes away that weight from the text. And then we can say content alignment is alignment.center. And then we can take that with weight away. And then we see that it starts going to the middle. Now, I also think that we can actually make this bigger. So let's make it 124 sp instead. So then let's look at our buttons. These buttons are good, but I want an extra button underneath as well. And this text should be text, and it should have reset as a text. Now we see that it's being plotted on the left, and I want it actually to be in the middle. So we'll go to our column again, and then we'll change our horizontal alignment. Alignment.center horizontally. Then we'll change the looks of this button. So let's have a same shape as the rest. And let's change the colors so that it's a gray color instead. Because this is a button that is not necessarily very important. So let's make it dark gray. And actually let's have a slightly bigger radius here as well. Let's make it 16 so that it stands out to be a different button. Now I think this space in between here is too small. So I'm gonna add another spacer there. And I'm gonna add the same spacer under the button, just to make it a little bit nicer on the eye. So there we have our view. Now let's implement some of the functionalities. So one easy way that we can do it is by creating a variable here. And now it's going to show me that it's not used yet, which is true. So here we can say text is counter. And since it is an integer, we have to transform it to a string. And then it says it is always 0, which is also true. So on our +1 button, in the on click, so on our button, we'll just say counter plus is 1. And on the other one, we'll say counter minus is 1. And finally, on our third button, we'll say counter is 0. Now let's run this in an application. So we'll make it a little bit bigger, but you can see it here on the right now that we have our application. So now if I hit the +1, we see that it doesn't actually increase the 0 value, which is unexpected because it actually does do the operation, right? The reason this doesn't get updated is because of the way we designed our counter. Whenever we increase our counter, our composable gets reiterated, meaning that this line gets run again, which resets it back to 0. So to avoid that behavior, we can change it into a remember, and then we'll call it a mutable state of, and we'll define it as 0. And in that case, we can make it a value instead, because counter itself stays that mutable state. Now we'll just have to import all of this, and then we should see that this doesn't give us any errors. So then we go to our function, counter.value, and there we say plus is 1. Here we call it counter.value, minus is 1, counter.value is 0. Now we can rerun it. And now we see that it shows us a mutable state there instead. That's because we didn't update it in the text here. So we can say counter.value to string. And then if we rerun it. And there we have our view. So we can use the plus buttons to increase the counter, the minus buttons to decrease the counter, and the reset to bring it back to 0. Now that is in essence the way you can make a view like this. However, because in this course we're going to use MVVM quite often, let's see how we can incorporate a view model into this. So in the same package, I'll make an extra file. I call it counter view model. Now when I create a view model, I always want to create an interface first. And in this interface, I define curly brackets what I will have. So I'll have a value. I call that counter. And in this case, it's actually going to be a state flow. Now we'll discuss what a state flow is in a different video. Then secondly, I want to have a few functions. So I want to have a function reset, doesn't return anything. I want to have a function increase counter, doesn't return anything either, and a function decrease counter. That is my interface done. Now let's make an implementation of this. Class counter view model imp. And now I'll define that this implements from counter view model. And actually it doesn't only incorporate it from that, but also from view model itself. And it's going to give us an error because we haven't actually implemented all of the issues. So if we hit Ctrl O, we can see here at the bottom that we need to implement these functions. So now with the override counter, we can say, okay, this is the one we're gonna have. So this counter will observe in our view. However, we also want to have a private version of that counter that we can edit. So usually I just use an underscore, and that's gonna be a mutable state flow. So that's a state flow that we are able to actually edit. And I'm gonna initialize that state flow as 0. Now we have to import that. And it's like this. Now in this getter, we can actually say counter as state flow. The reason we do it like this is because then we have a private variable that we can only edit in this class, and a public variable that we can read out in our view. Now in the reset function, all we have to do is say counter.value is equal to 0. Here we say counter.value plus is 1, and here we say counter.value minus is 1. Now the reason I made that interface before is because I also want to have a second variant of this class, namely a fake counter VM, and that's going to implement my counter view model as well. Uses the same functions, but instead the getter is just going to be a mutable state flow directly as state flow. The reset is going to be empty. The increase counter is going to be empty as well, and the decrease counter is going to be empty as well. This view model is solely based for our preview in Composable. Because now if we go back to our counter view, we can say here that as a parameter, this takes a view model of class counter view model. Then what we will see is here in the preview, it'll start to disappoint us. It'll say, hey, I need this class from you. And usually when I say here counter view model implementation, it actually doesn't work that often, because sometimes you implement things that don't work in a preview. So instead, we'll just use a fake counter VM. Now then, here we have to update our on clicks to say vm.reset, vm.decrease, and here we'll have vm.increase. What we've done now is that all of our functionality is actually, we can take away this counter as well. And of course, in the text, we then have to say vm.counter.value. And then usually it tells us, hey, there's an issue, because we actually have to counter value is, we actually have to collect it. Counter.collect as state, and then we'll take the value directly. So now we can just say counter value here, which is an integer, so we have to convert it to a string. So now we've gotten our value from our view model, and all of our actual executables are in this view model. So it's very easy for us to see or edit what should happen if we use this view model. Now the last thing we have to do is when we create our counter view here, is pass the view model. So we'll say here val counter view model is counter view model implementation, and we'll pass that to the counter view. Now if we rerun this, we should see that the functionality is exactly the same. We haven't really worked on data persistence yet, so when we close our application, it actually deletes our value. But that is something that we'll do in another video. I hope that you could follow along and that you now understand how I made this application. Perhaps you already did it yourself in the same way, or in a completely different way. And if it works, that is probably also fine. There's always multiple ways to roam. Anyways, I wish you a lot of good luck in your future application programming, and we'll see each other in a future video.